Good evening. This is our special meeting on Thursday, October 13th of 2022. Mr. Wade, please call the roll.
Ms. Briner.
Here.
Ms. Cook.
Here.
Ms. Jessling.
Present.
Ms. Payne.
Here.
Mr. Tuttle. Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good evening. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to share some expectations of this meeting, which is intended to be a work session for the board. As always, the community is welcome to be here with us, and we thank you for your interest in our schools. As we are trying to work through an array of topics this evening as a board, there will not be an opportunity for the audience to speak or participate. But please know comments from the community members are welcome during the hearing of the public section of our regularly scheduled meetings. As board president, it is my job to enforce the rules of the meeting so that the board can conduct its business. We kindly ask everyone to respect the expectations of this evening's meeting. We are all invested in Mentor Schools and care deeply about our students and staff. We are all committed to working hard for our community's children and providing a high-quality education where students can learn and grow academically, socially, and emotionally. There's a lot of work to do tonight, and I look forward to getting meaningful conversation and discussion underway among the board. Thank you for your cooperation. We will move on to Board of Education report and recommendations. Mr. Heap.
So tonight, our first topic is board policies. As we had discussed at our last work session, just looking at an overhaul of the entire board policy manual. Mr. Wade and I had the opportunity to meet with two organizations that specialize in writing board policy and keeping those updated. One of those happens to be Neola. So we have invited them here this evening to discuss a little bit about what their process is, what their policies look like, and basically how we would embark on this process if we choose to go this direction. We've invited Mr. Ed Holland here to speak to us this evening about the Neola policies. I believe he's got a presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Holland.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me this evening. I want to just give you a general overview about policy manuals. It's the most important task that the board has next to hiring a superintendent and treasurer to help establish the direction and the path and the parameters of your school district operations. So I will just highlight a little bit about Neola, Inc. Neola stands for Northeast Ohio Learning Association. It started with 5 superintendents, 5 school districts in Summit County in the late 80s, early 90s, and they were sharing different policies that they developed with each other. One had an issue and the other one with, oh, well, maybe I could use that too. So it expanded from those 5 school districts here in Northeast Ohio around the Summit County area to over 1,500 plus school districts in the United States. We're in 6 different states. We pretty much have almost a little more than 90% of all the school districts in Ohio, all of Michigan, all of Florida, Indiana, some all of West Virginia, some in Wisconsin. So we have been expanding our services. So I'll highlight a little bit about Neola's work. We help provide bylaws and policies for school districts, the administrative guidelines, which I'll explain a little bit more what these are. We also provide the service of electronic publishing of your policy manual. So everyone in the community, whether it's in the school district or public, are able to access your policies 24/7. And it ties right into your board docs platform. So it's an automatic and seamless transition. And the nice thing is that you're able to read your policies online. If you do have your board meetings, you are live with your board meetings on, and you're able to move the different documents and so on from the agenda and from the policy manual. So it makes it real easy. And then we provide an update service where we will update the general bulk of the policies twice a year, and I'll get into that a little bit more. So of the services that Neola provides, we have these 4 items. Now, the policy is the main domain of the board. It's your statutory responsibility is to provide policies and a policy manual for your school district. It's what the district's about. It helps express the understanding of your compliance with state and federal laws, and that's important to help reduce chances of litigation. The purpose of policy, again, is a statutory requirement. We're addressing federal and state. We have law firms in Chicago and in Washington, D.C. for our federal regulations, and then we have 2 large law firms here in Ohio, and I'll highlight those in a couple minutes. You are a regulatory agency, and you do have to have policies in order to help drive your work. There's administrative guidelines that is set up to help take the policies, help the treasurer and the superintendent understand how you're going to implement that policy into the school district. Especially in larger districts that may have multiple buildings, you want to ensure that there's consistency across the different district buildings, that your policy is being implemented appropriately and consistently in those buildings. You want to be able to ensure that all of your administrators, all your teachers, your staff members are implementing board policy at all times. We don't want to deviate it. And the board policy follows statute, but it also addresses who, when, where it's to be done, and how it's to be implemented. Our policy service is comprehensive. It's current and up to date. We're compliant with state and federal regulations. We work closely with the auditor's department, and you'll see that in our Connected. Our comprehensive content has 10 different areas, and it's broken down in each one of these different categories. There are specialized policies, but there are employment policies that are unique to administrators, instructional staff, non-instructional staff. And so you'll see a policy, like an example right now, the laws changed this spring about weapons and weapons in school. We have an update that's currently in place that's addressing the administrative policy on weapons, the classified weapons policy, the professional staff weapons policy, and then the overall district policy of weapons that would be brought on campus. So we break it down into each area. Some of some of our competitors in the state will lump them together in different groups. One client has put their different policies in multiple different areas, and you need a roadmap in order to figure out where those policies are located. Ours is a lot more simpler. You can find it, and then there's multiple search mechanisms that's attached that you can search your own policy manual for something instantly, or a meta search, which you'll be able to search all 1,500 of those school districts throughout the United States that are Neola. And then it also can bring in outside research that's tied in to those policy topics that you're researching on. Our current status is that typically every year we do 2 major updates, one in August and one in the end of January. We will provide an update template of the policies that are being changed. You'll see those templates. If I have time, I'll open up one tonight to give you a general overview on how that would work. Those updates, for the first one, is primarily one that's based on the changes in the General Assembly here in Ohio. A lot of times you'll have your biennial budget bill that will have more than just financial components, but also policy matters that affect all students in all schools. And so we work through the summer to make sure that those changes are included in that update. And then the second update is out at the end of January. We're finding that we're bringing our updates a little earlier in the month because of some of the changes that have taken place. We anticipate there may be a lot of changes between now and the end of December with lame duck sessions. You don't know what's put in and what's changed, and so therefore we will have all those changes and up to date in the January update. Now, we'll also bring in best practices that other districts in the state are using. Maybe they've created a special policy to meet a special need, and then all of a sudden, we'll share that with other districts throughout the state. You can use it, maybe you don't want to use it, or maybe it sparks an idea on how you could adjust and refine your own policies. So that will come out at any time, and then occasionally we'll have to have a special release or special update. During the pandemic, we had 4 or 5 different special releases because changes were taking place on a rapid basis. In that update service, you'll get up to 3 hours of consulting time from me at each one of those updates. And in the interim, in between those 2 regular updates, if you do have a special update, I'm available. I can come in if you need help, but generally I don't make a district visit unless you need help with those updates. Usually the special releases are very detailed and explicit from our attorneys to help you make those changes. To be compliant with our Ohio and federal law, we have Enos Britton and Peters Galeo Markakis, 2 major school law firms here in the state of Ohio. John Britton and Scott Peters have been with Neola from the very, very beginning, and as their careers and paths have changed, they have split off in different directions, but they have maintained the same policies that they've worked with from the beginning. And then we have our 2 law firms for federal regulations and compliance, one out of the Washington, D.C. office, and then Hirsch Blackwell out of Chicago. So these are large firms that we work with on a regular basis. We meet with them on an ongoing basis, but all the associates here in Ohio, we meet with our law firms a week in July and the first week in December to stay current on any of the changes. Our connections, all the Ohio associates that work here in Ohio for Neola are, I'd say 99% of them are all former superintendents. Like myself, I've got 14 years as a superintendent here in Northeast Ohio. I retired from Orange City Schools in Pepper Pike. I was also in Cuyahoga Heights and Cuyahoga Falls for 16 years. BASA, we meet with them on a regular basis. We meet with the Ohio Department of Education and the Ohio Department of Health to find out what policy changes or what recommendations that they have for school districts. And we have provided, which is kind of a quirky thing, to be honest with you, because it doesn't work real well with board docs, because each district has their own unique forms. So we have a blank generic form batch of policies and administrative guideline forms that you can incorporate into your own policy manual and your own policies. Every one of our policies have our statutory citations and regulations added to that. Uniform grant compliance are connected. The Education Department of General Administrative Regulations, or EDGAR, had gone through some massive changes in the last 2 years. As Bill can attest to, some of our changes and procedures, especially when we received all kinds of federal money in the last 2 years. When you have money from the federal government, you've got strings and different regulations on how you have to spend that. I know you guys have spent all of that federal money by September 30th, and you guys are all caught up. The Elementary Secondary Education Reauthorization, also known as ESSA, these are 3 example policies that you can look at that when they've changed, we have a policy and administrative guidelines on how to implement and address homeless children or homeless students. We have employment reference policy. That was something that was developed as a requirement. You have to be able to provide employment references for equal employment opportunities. Your Policy 5111 just has been updated this week. Eligibility of resident and non-resident students is another example, and then we have student records. That's also being updated at this update. I wanted to give you an example. Both of these are one of my clients. The clients I work with are all the school districts in Ashtabula County, Lake County, Geauga County, Stark County, and a handful of them in Summit and Portage. I don't work with any of the districts that I was an administrator on, and in that way, it's no conflict of interest or anything like that. Madison is one of my clients. We'll see if I can get this on from here. I may have to because I'm away from it. Give me a second.
Does Kirtland use Neola?
Yeah, Kirtland is a Neola district. So when I was at Kirtland, we used Neola. Ed would come out twice a year, like he said, and go through the policies. We would review them, update those in sections. The board, we had a procedure where we take a half or a third and kind of each month subsequently put them on, and then update administrative guidelines at that time as well.
If you look at an opening splash page of a school district, you would have the ability, when the public goes to your policy page, they would be able to see this page, not this particular one, but hopefully your board, or an icon or whatever you want to put on your front page. You would also be able to leave notes or minutes, and you could also showcase some of your policies that may be important or might be an issue for conversation at a given time. You will be able to go in and do a local update. We will send you an email telling you when the update is loaded. When you do that, you'll see that we've had all of our updates since we went on to the Board Docs platform, 2016. And give you an example, here was a special release that we had highlighted in February. Every spring, we will give you a sample Ohio Student Handbook and a list of annual notifications that are required for a district to provide to the public. So we help do a lot of the work for you. You just still have to edit it to tweak, make it your own. We had a special update in May after the legislators created a Juneteenth holiday. However, they created it incorrectly and had to be corrected and changed because the way that they passed it didn't affect anybody. And that wasn't exactly what they wanted. They wanted to make sure that non-teaching employees, 11 and 12-month employees, were able to receive the Juneteenth holiday. Our last update in January is volume number 2, and then this one we just released is volume 41.1. We'll give you a general overview. It explains the policy process, how the update is set up, and we'll also highlight key things like the IRS mileage reimbursement rate had changed here in June, and we provide you with the documentation. You just don't have to take our word for it. We'll provide you with all documentation. We will always provide you with some type of legal alerts from our attorneys to give you a showcase of some of the issues that are currently trending in the United States and in Ohio, but we'll also provide you with updates on why these policies are being changed. So each one of the policies would be listed. We'll give you the rationale and everything else to provide an update on why they're being changed. Some of them are required, some are not. If you don't have a preschool, you really wouldn't need the preschool program policy revisions. So let me change real quick. You will have an active policy manual. It'll look like this. Public would be able to go to the policy manual and see, click on, and you'll be able to see all of the policies right there. If you upload the update, all of our editing will take place behind the scenes in a private editing portal where you would be working on policy adjustments. You will have the policy manual. You'll also have administrative guidelines. This district is working through policy guidelines right now. So as you're looking at the draft, if we scroll down, this district has uploaded and you'll see that all the legal alerts are there. You're able to click on that legal alert now or forever, and you can print them out or share them. It's nice, the administrators could share these items by linking or emailing. And then the policies itself. Here's an example of a template. The templates are very general. You'll see that this language here is covered with a bracket in that paragraph. It's an option for you. If your team wants that option, then you would highlight this, either put an X in it or delete this bracket. Everything is redlined, and you'll see all the changes that would take place and the different options that you would have. That's working from the template. Some districts will work from the template, others will work from their active policy and merge the revisions in it, so that it's always redlined. When they're done with the edits and placed on the board agenda, the board would then have 2 readings. The first reading, if there's any changes between the first reading to the last reading, and the second reading would be a vote. That's general. Some will do 3 readings. It just depends on your process. But you really have to have 2 readings. Now, with this policy manual, I wanted to help highlight in that active, you would have bylaws. The bylaws are the actual operating standards for the Board of Education. It highlights what the procedures are, your legislative procedures, your voting record, process, and your authorities. The point is the bylaws is set up by the board for the operations of the board. Generally, and if you stay with the template, bylaw changes can only take place with 4/5 of the board voting. General policies on 2 votes would be 3 of the 5, a simple majority of those present to approve them. Is there anything that I can help answer questions about the Neola policies, the process?
Yeah, so who has access to policy updates when they come out? Does the board see that and the administrators at once, or what does that look like?
When you sign up with Neola, you would highlight who is the main contact liaison.
Okay.
Generally, it's the superintendent, because the superintendent has to make policy recommendations. The superintendent and his team would work with the staff to vet those drafts and templates and then make a recommendation to the board. Whether there's board members on a policy committee or whether it's just an administrative team meeting first, that format is up to you guys.
Can you talk to us about the transition process? So when you go into a district that doesn't currently work with Neola, we have all of our things. What's kind of your timeline and how does that work?
That's an excellent question. And right now, I've got 3 new clients this year. You'll be my 3rd one. One's with OSBA. You guys are Pebble and Wagner. There's some that are, most of them are all OSBA. They'd either drop us or come back to Neola after finding that some of the challenges of updating. Like I mentioned before, a lot of those policy components are spread out in different areas. Now, I've got a crosswalk document that would allow you to crosswalk it over. The simplest and easiest way that most of my clients have had is working from the templates and answering the questions in the template based on how you're actually operating at that time. Then the board would review that and make those final decisions when you make that final policy. Timelines, generally it's about a year. If you get started now, and if I could jump back to my other policy, I can give you an overview. But generally, the overview would be we would do training right now with the team here in the district through December. Hopefully by March and April, the board should be able to get to see the first reading of the first draft. That's a lot of work. It's ambitious. Both of these gentlemen have worked with Neola before, so they've got experience with it. They can work through that. How you do it is up to you. I can help draft. I can help draft half. I can help draft all of it. and meet with administrators and highlight that, or they can work through it themselves. Chardon went through it a year ago. They worked through it themselves. I think I met with them 10 hours at the most. You would get up to 48 hours of my time to be able to work drafting, meeting with the administrators or so on with the contract. That'd be 24 hours with policy, another 24 hours to do administrative guidelines if you want to do both. The beauty of our package is that you have the policy and the guidelines on how to implement it, and they go hand in hand. When we update one policy, we'll also update the guidelines to help you with that.
Are the guidelines available for the public as well?
Public record, as you saw here a minute ago at this district, the guidelines are there.
Okay, so they see both the policy and then also the administrative guidelines?
Absolutely, they're public records.
And then the options with the brackets, so those are only seen then by, let's say, the superintendent, and then they put that for the whole board for review?
Correct.
When there's like an update?
Correct, during an update. When they go through the update, or even you'll work from the current templates and be able to create your own policy from that template. And then those red lines will stay on. Only our production team can remove the redlining and give you the clean version that'll be posted on active. We can't change any active policies, only our production can. They can't change them unless the board approves and there's a disposition sheet that demonstrates the actual board approval date. So all of that's put together. So there's a lot of catches and balances. Once we process that, we send it back to you in an archive folder so your administrative team can double check to make sure we didn't make any mistakes and we got everything covered, or there was nothing missing.
So when you're doing that interface, you would take our existing policy, let's say on a specific topic, let's say snow removal. And you would have the correlating policy from your set, and would we be looking at those side by side?
You could do it that way. It becomes cumbersome and a challenge, but you could do it that way.
What would be the preferred, more efficient way to do it?
Most efficient way is to give you guys the template, walk through that template, and look at the different challenges and options that you have in there. Because our policy is going to cover everything that you're doing. And you can have a policy manual that's that big or a general policy manual that's smaller. Our policy manual gives that district the opportunity to include all those regulations. So parent A doesn't have to look up the citation. They can look at your policy and know exactly what you're expecting, and what the policy states is the same as the statute.
So let's say snow removal. If our policy states this, your preferred or new policy would be somewhat different. And are we adding, subtracting? To what extent do we personalize for this district the policies in your manual? Because we need to remain compliant, so doesn't that get a bit cumbersome in itself?
It can be, but please know that our templates are general enough to cover almost all scenarios. However, you also have the flexibility to tweak the policy language, because this is your policy manual, it's not ours. And so you'll have the license to use our platform and our templates. We stand by all legal representation of our policies. Our counsel will go to court to defend any of the language that's in any of our policies. If you alter that policy language and you add some unique special language, unique to Mentor, make sure you run it by your legal counsel, because your counsel is the one who's going to have to defend it.
That's what I was curious about. So if I don't know, let's say 2 inches of snow, X will happen, but that would be ill-advised, let's say from Neola's legal team, and we've pushed through and do that anyway, then that's for our attorney
To defend and confirm, sure.
Gotcha. But you would make a recommendation perhaps that, that would be ill-advised.
Correct. And that is very, very unique. It doesn't really happen a whole lot, but Different districts have some unique demands and requests, and they're quite capable of putting it in there. When your board approves the policy and you send it to us in a disposition sheet in board docs, we will place that on the agenda, in your manual, however you send it to us.
But we've been warned that this area may be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we just let you know that. And
Yeah.
you'll see in the contract, it spells that all out in great details. Our latest client I just picked up was Chagrin Falls, and we're working through that process of developing their new manual now.
2 updates a year, is that pretty much standard?
It is, because you're going to get a big hit with General Assembly changes in November, December, and we'll have that prepped. And then there's the cycle of the regulations from ODE, when they create regulations. So your legislation, your General Assembly is going to create statutes. ODE is going to have to create the regulations. We work with them to ensure that those regulations are met. Give you an example, the new graduation requirements that were new about 3 years ago are in effect for this year's graduating seniors. And with that, we've had ups and downs, delays, and challenges with COVID the last 2 years. ODE is supposed to be drafting new regulations for the graduation beyond, and we are hoping to release that in the January update. So generally, that is very accurate. We do have enough, but sometimes special circumstances happen and we have to provide additional updates. And that's what the special releases are.
Craig and Bill, just curious, is that pretty much what other companies that you've worked with have given?
Like other board policy companies as far as the
Right,
updates go?
like what we're getting from
Yeah,
Football.
traditionally, it's going to be 2. OSBA might do a couple of special releases, on kind of a quarterly basis, but oftentimes there's nothing really to report at those times.
How many hours of time would you say would be anticipated to make this transition? As far as, how often we'll need to meet and work on it as a team to go through all the regulations?
The ideal scenario is that the administrative team puts together, and your policy committee, whoever that is, puts together the entire manual, and the board votes on one manual. So it transitions from your current manual to the new manual instantaneously. Once you start with that process, we would recommend that any changes in statute, you would use our template for the new model, for the new policy changes. That would need to be brought up to speed right away. Then you would use that. You would have it approved by the board. If it's something that's needed immediately, you could take care of that. You would have that policy in place and board approved. It just would not be displayed in the board docs platform until you have the entire manual all together. It would be advantageous for the board to get the manual in March and April, maybe the first reading in May, second reading in the end of May or 1st of June. You would like to have that policy manual approved sometime by May and June. You can start the school year with the new manual, but it's going to take us probably 3 weeks to get it current, take all the red lines and cleaned up, and be able to display. So if we could have it approved in May, definitely you would have it displayed for the start of school. If you get it done by the end of June, we probably will still be able to get it done by that time. One district that I've worked with wanted to work on one section, and then the board looks at it and approves that section, and that section stays. We won't put it in the new manual until all sections are approved. So you could work through over 10 months, or you could do 3 of them. You'll probably want to start with educational programs, the 5,000s, and get that done. That's a big project, especially with the federal special education, IDEA items, Title policies and regulations, and there's some parent components to that too. So you would need to work through that.
Have Craig and Bill, have either of you been through this transition process at either of the districts that you've worked at? Or is this new for all of us?
Yeah, this would be new for me. I've worked with both OSBA policies when I was in Hilliard and Neola policies in Dublin and Delaware, but they were pre-existing before I jumped into my roles in those districts.
I have not. I've worked with Neola at Riverside as an administrator. We obviously had Pepple Wagner here when I was principal at Mentor High School, and as a superintendent, Kirkland used Neola. So I would, like I said, I would meet. That was a parting gift from Mr. Barrett to me, was to make sure that we had to update quite a few policies. So it was actually as Ed was transitioning in, so we did a lot of policy work when I was at Kirtland. And when you're the only person in Kirtland,
It's all you.
Two.
you get to do it all yourself.
And again, just to kind of touch on the process a little bit as well, and, from a larger district perspective, when I was in Dublin, our superintendent would look closely at those different sections, and whoever had the most work with that particular policy would be the one that he would sit with or send the information to and say, here's the update. Based on our practice, is this aligned with what we're doing? Or if there are those choices for the different options where, we saw the one red line piece where it said each semester or annually, we could make sure that that aligned with what we were currently doing, just to make sure that everything was really following what our practice was. So that would be the level of involvement that, obviously we would do here as well. And we've got, a curriculum department we'd be looking through a lot of the programming pieces with. We've got an HR department that would be looking through our classified and certified staff sections with. We've got a treasurer's department that's very robust that would be looking at the financial pieces. So, this would involve a lot of different people in our district to make this policy manual transition happen.
2 years ago, I did Canton City, went from OSBA to, again, there's a crosswalk that I can help show you where the different policies from OSBA are fitting into Neola's policies. There, I trained 18 administrators and supervisors, and every one of those individuals had a team that they worked through different sections. It came together in probably 7-8 months. So it can be done quickly. You don't want it to drag out. You want to try to get it done as quickly as possible. But it's one of those things that's out of sight and it's not on my desk, so my job is to prod you to keep on it. And if you can't find the time, I'm available to assist and help do that. So we just want to keep the team moving along to make sure that they're getting the policies completed.
Have you looked at our set of policies?
I have.
And because they've been crafted over a number of years, with tweaks and adjustments, do you think that there is just a general benefit to kind of a clean sweep to reframe everything, to kind of build it into a more coherent policy manual?
I do, and by starting, that's why I referenced about starting with the templates, because if you're starting from what you're actually doing, I've had clients here in Lake County that said, oh, we're not doing that. I said, well, why aren't you? That's what your policy says. That's your role, is to ensure that it's implemented correctly. And they've had some eye-openers, and if you're starting from scratch and you're working through that policy and say, yeah, this is exactly what we're doing, we're not doing this, well, that we don't necessarily need that language, it's helpful. Give you one example to help answer your question, Narcan. There's been a big push. Some districts want to have a policy on Narcan. We don't recommend that, but we have one for you, and it's a special request. And some districts have them, some don't. We will give you the overall general package, and then if that's an area that you want or need, you request it, generally we have it.
Craig, I don't know if this is for you or Bill, but do we have a cost associated with this yet, or?
We do.
Okay.
We do. Ed, that was $26,000 for the overhaul. And
Correct.
then annually, it was 2,500? Am I wrong on that one?
Well, if, the cost is not too far off unless you're doing installment payments, paying it over 6 months or a 2-year period. So it just depends. So pretty much, it's 26,000 some change. That covers one 12-month period for us to work through the transition, to get you the policy manual and administrative guidelines complete, displaying, electronic displaying or publishing, and it would also include the first 2 updates. So if you start now, it'll include the January and August updates for that whole time period.
And then after that initial year, then per year, what was that cost?
For Jazz, I think $1,500, $1,600.
That's what I remember.
There's a $750 annual fee for publishing on board docs. And then it's like $1,500 to do the 2 updates a year.
So 15 to
Oh,
1,600.
yeah,
for the
that's what
two
it was.
updates, and then
Yeah.
700
Almost
for the
2,500.
Yeah, 2450.
Correct, for the year.
2450. I've got it in my
2450.
notes.
Do we
Yep.
know, what are we paying Pepper Wagner
Just saved
to
us
do this?
$50.
Yeah, what are we currently paying?
I don't have that off the top of my head. That I don't know. But what I will say is that we're paying our attorneys quite a bit to assist us when we don't have good policy. So for every hour that we spend, we're spending $310 to address concerns with policies that are not written correctly. So I don't think if we were to look at what we spend strictly on policy updates from Pepper Wagner is a apples to apples comparison.
So looking at the way we're doing it now, we're paying hourly versus an annual cost.
Correct.
But we have an annual cost as well.
Based on whatever work they do for us on, when they give us their updates, yes.
Okay.
But you would argue that there's a
It's not fixed.
structural improvement,
It's not a fixed rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
cleaner
Per
and more.
service.
I would argue there's an opportunity cost here either way with the cost of doing business. So, being the person who's responsible often to provide guidance to the board on the policies, and when we go to the policy and I go, the policy's unclear, it's outdated, it doesn't necessarily align to the policies that I know that I worked with at Neola, or if we go and search OSBA, it's in best practices, and I think, Ed, you didn't touch on this, but we heard it both from Ed and from OSBA when we spoke to them, is that you should be reviewing all your policies at least every 5 years. So that alone should be something that we should take into consideration when it comes to best practice.
No, we haven't done that. Been here for 15 years.
And we often go to a situation where we are going to our policies and not having clarity. So I think, this is a time for us to work cohesively as a new administrative team. We have a new superintendent. I've only been here for a year. We have our respective cabinets. We can dive into the work that we need to do. We know that the policies coming from Neola are aligned to the law, both the state of Ohio and federal law, as well as the fact that they have administrative guidelines that go with it. I've worked with it. I've done 8 policy updates as a superintendent in all the areas. I feel comfortable going through and looking through their procedures. For me, it's a no-brainer. I think the cost is going to be saved on the back end because we'll have policies that we know are all aligned. They align to the current law, they're updated. We can structure them to meet the needs of the district. Particularly more so in the administrative guideline would be the area we'd probably want to do that based on experience, as long as it aligns to the policy. And I think the issue is going to be it's going to be the time it takes. It is a big undertaking to do this, but I think with the support of Neola and having worked with them, I know that support is there. Ed helped me. Again, like I said, when I was at Kirtland, I was by myself. I didn't have a cabinet. I was a cabinet of one. And I think having worked with Ed, and I know Craig's committed to this, and based on the discussions we've had, we've talked about it with our leadership teams, both of us, it's time to do it.
And OSBA does not offer the administrative guidelines piece. Wasn't that a disadvantage to their package? They don't spell
Correct.
that out.
Correct.
When would we be looking at possibly like voting on this and making it, like starting this process?
Well, I think that the way we would do that would be through approval of a contract with Neola. So we would get a contract from Neola for that approval, and that's kind of where that would start. Authorized, you guys know I like to make sure all those contracts are approved by the board. So we would do that through that piece, and then once you approve that contract, we would sign it, myself and the president at that time, and then we would start that process. So sooner rather than later, as Ed said, because we want, if we're trying to shoot for the start of next school year, we are kind of a little bit under the gun, because that's less than a year away, obviously, at this point.
So the next step would be for you to inform me that you want a contract to look at and review. Our corporate, I'll contact them. I'll have corporate send you the contract. You guys can review it and go from there.
If there's any specific policies that we would want to look into, could we go to like Madison's, for example, and look through those policies?
Anybody in
That's-
Ashtabula
like,
County,
those are
Lake
pretty
County?
standard, okay.
Absolutely, they're all
And
there.
Annie, if you look at the public participation policies that I shared
Yeah,
with
I
you
saw
and
those,
and
yeah.
listed all the Neola districts right there, and you can look at any of them, because there are subtle variations from one to the next based
Yeah.
on, the different policies that you're
Sure.
looking at. So I'd encourage you to take a look at some of those. It's actually quite interesting.
Sounds good.
And you can go to the website typically of any district and pull up their board and go to that, because that's what I do. I go to Kirtland's.
This is ours.
I go, what did I do? What did I come up with there? What did I do? So, they change.
I hope he's up to date.
He is. He is. See some Kirtland residents in the crowd, so I'll make sure that he is.
So do we have to discuss now, like,
Anybody can
are we
access
going to get, a contract to view, or,
Page.
since, I know you said sooner than later?
My recommendation is that we would.
Okay.
Time during the day.
I think Craig's is as well. Your recommendation is to move forward with Neola, correct? I don't wanna
Yeah,
speak
oh,
on
I'm
that.
sorry, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Tom and I were talking about sending him a link to one of the policies that I had pulled up here, so.
So,
But yeah, absolutely. Neil has been great policy for us when I was in Dublin and Delaware, and the updates are phenomenal. And it kept us out of trouble, quite honestly.
and so how, and we can, I think one of the things that we would want to discuss tonight is how that maybe, what board involvement would be, but we don't need to decide that obviously tonight. I know, for example, in Kirtland, I would get the updates. I would scan those in, not scan them, download them in and send that to the board, the overview, because there's a nice explanation of why, we have this update to this policy because of a change in law, or ODE make a recommendation. Is it required? Is it a revision? And then we would send the policies that way. And then our protocol is I would review them, make the updates, and then send them to the board in chunks, because sometimes you get a lot of policies that need to be updated.
18,
so-
this update is big.
So I was always doing policy, just from experience, because Ed would grant me a New Year's gift of, a list of policies, and it would take us until June or July to get all those approved. By the way, we'd break them up. And just as I got the last one done, Ed would give me another gift in August, and then we would start the whole process over and kind of go through that. So, because as you said, there's always something else on your plate to do, and it could be a time-consuming task. And I think we've talked about doing it internally and then sharing that with the board, getting the board feedback, and then kind of going that route as well. But
Would that be for the overhaul and the updates, or would you have more board involvement as we're doing the overall?
Really, it's probably up to the board, and we asked that question of both organizations, and they said it truly is a district decision. The majority of policy updates have traditionally had like 2 board members on them, so we can get together without the quorum and be able to just plow through some things together, and see what that looks like. Again, I'm almost wondering if you'll let Bill and I and our teams take the first crack at it, sit down with you guys, that way you can see what the original piece was coming from Ed's group, so that you've got all the red line pieces in there, kind of see where we've talked about some things administratively to align with what we do here in Mentor, and then make sure you guys are comfortable with that, or if we need to make some tweaks before we bring that to the full board, that might be a good process for us to follow.
One thing I was thinking of, because we talked about strategic plan and being in that fifth year, that this is a pretty ambitious undertaking and would have fundamental underpinnings for everything else that happens. Maybe we could take this as our first 22-23 project, and then that'll be ready to go, and then we can work on a new strategic plan next fall. Does that seem like a reasonable thing to do?
Yeah, and I believe I sent everybody the email today about the one additional piece to my goals after we discussed those on Tuesday, of really getting that community input from a community survey standpoint to really look at those 4 pillars of our current strategic plan. That'll allow us to gather that information as well here during this year while we're doing our work on our board policies, and then jump into more of that strategic planning work. Even at the end of this, at the end of this project, immediately switching into that major project. The other thing I'll share with you, we had our Business Advisory Council meeting this morning, and a couple of the individuals that are on that committee asked about the strategic plan, and they're like, we really enjoyed being part of that when that happened about 5 years ago. Where are we in that process? So we kind of shared with them, this is going to be one of those study years, listening to a lot of people and figuring out what needs to be tweaked. So I know we've got some people in the community that are very anxious to be part of that too.
That's great. I think that'll be a good plan.
I'm grateful for that.
Very much.
Community involvement.
Yeah.
Is there any more questions for Mr. Holland?
Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Good luck. Just let me know.
Okay, Ed, we'll be in
All right,
touch.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm sure Ms. Kirby can help kind of disconnect you back there.
So as we jump into that work, I still believe there are a couple of things that need to be addressed out of our current policies as well. So I want to stick on this topic a little bit longer if we could. Coming out of our last board work session, we had a lot of discussion about public participation at our board meetings. We've had another board meeting since then, and quite honestly, nothing's getting better. Anytime I've switched positions or switched districts, I've always indicated that I would spend a lot of time listening that first year before I jump into making any major overhauls or proposals. Obviously, that's not going to happen here. One of the things, obviously, is looking at our board policy manual and making a major overhaul there. I'm 2 months in, and that's a pretty big endeavor. The other thing I was hoping to do is listen to as many different people as I could before making recommendations on public participation, but quite honestly, it's out of control. I've joked around with a couple of different groups that I've spoken to when they've asked me, why in the world would you want this position? And I've always talked about 3 things. Number 1, it's Mentor, and this is an unbelievable community, an unbelievable city. It's the shining star of Lake County, so that was number 1. Number 2, it's a dream position for me to sit in the superintendent's role. You put those 2 things together, and this is a pretty good gig. Said the third thing is, during this whole process, I didn't watch any board meetings online. And I kind of joke about that a little bit, and now that I've been able to experience them in person and sit up on that stage and witness what takes place, there's obvious need for change. Spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks between our last work session researching policies from across the state. The the Department of Education for the state actually puts together a listing of similar school districts to each district in the state. Anybody can get on ODE's site, search similar districts, click on Mentor, and it will spit out 20 different districts that are similar to us across the state of Ohio. You can do that for any school district. You can do it for Kirtland, you can do it for Perry. It spits out a different 20, all based on demographics, size, whether it's rural or urban, many different categories. So that's where I started, with those 20 districts that are similar to us, and I jumped into their board policies. Number one, to figure out, are they Neola or OSBA, or what do they do? And then I started to dig through the public participation policies in those organizations. I also looked at all of the Lake County schools, looked at some of the other school districts around Northeast Ohio as well, getting into Cuyahoga and Geauga County. And then, again, out of some of the conversations that I've currently had with some of our community stakeholders, I started looking at some of those districts that I think we're aspiring to be like. I've been fortunate to work in 3 of those districts already in my career, in Hilliard, Dublin, and Delaware. I say we aspire to be them because their academic records are unrivaled. The innovation in those districts is absolutely incredible. And again, I think we can look at them as an example for us to try and follow. I don't think I realized how bad it was until I went to the BASA conference last week or the week before. And some of the other superintendents are like, what in the world is going on up there? And I just shook my head. I said, we don't have public participation policy that allows us to really get our arms wrapped around this. I don't want to go through another meeting like we had on Tuesday night. Dealt with the fallout from it for the last 24, 48 hours now. My email inbox gets filled up after every single board meeting that we have. And quite honestly, that's not what I was hired to do. It's exhausting. So pulling those public participation policies out, and I provided each of the board members a summary. Again, I looked at 50 different school districts around the state. Out of those 50 different districts, 41 of them have time limits established. Now, I know we talked about that at our last meeting. It's probably not something I would recommend that we jump right into at this point. You'll see in the Neola policies when we go through this process that the majority of those do have a time limit. Again, the majority of those fall around 30 minutes. The other pieces that are in most of the policies are a registration process for public participation at the board meetings. I believe 42 out of the 50 have that included in their policies. I believe, again, 40 to 41 of them, you must be recognized by the presiding officer of the board meeting in order to speak.
Craig, did you say you shared this with us?
It was in the Google Docs.
It's a Google sheet.
So it didn't come as an email?
It would have come
It's
as an email as
attached.
well.
Was it a separate email, or was it in your weekly update?
It's a
No, it's in a
separate
separate email.
It's in our,
It was within the last week.
yeah. it-
Oh, not just from today, okay.
Yeah, not just
Thank you.
today.
I'm like, you didn't get anything today from that.
It's that Google Docs.
Thank you.
The final piece that I'll mention then is that there are several of the policies that place limits on who can speak at the board meeting as well. So I've shared all of that with you, just to give you that information. I've given you the specific districts and what they do. I've given you some sample Neola policy and some sample OSBA policy language as well, just so that you have something to refer to and look at. Spent a little bit of time also going through our current public participation policy, and ironically enough, Ed said some of it right there too, where you read through it and, you know, there are a couple of paragraphs that we don't even do this, so I'm not even sure why it's in the policy at this point. But I think steps need to start taking place now so that we can have some civility back in our board meetings. Out of all of those pieces of language, I think there are three things that I would recommend at this point for our consideration. One is I do think we need a registration process to speak. Consistently, what we see in our public participation is people getting up on both sides of the auditorium. One person will say one thing that ticks off somebody on the other side of the auditorium, so they get up to speak. That ticks off somebody on the other side, they get back up to speak, and it goes on and on and on. That's not productive for our board meetings. It's a very simple process. Done it in every district that I've been in. We have a form. People fill it out when they first get to the meeting. They submit those before the meeting starts. Traditionally, those would be given to the public information officer. In our case, probably hand those over to Kristen Estes. Those are then presented to the treasurer or the CFO. And then the treasurer or CFO would then recognize each speaker and call them to the microphone to speak on the topic that they've included in their form. Those would be the only people that would speak during the meeting. This would prevent the back and forth going on and, oh, somebody's going to say this, so I'm going to get up and say that, which is not productive. The other thing that I would recommend at this point would be who is allowed to speak in our meetings. Again, Mentor is a very attractive place for a lot of people. We're a big district. There are a lot of people around Lake County, around Geauga County, around Cuyahoga County that look to us to see what we're doing. We have people show up at our meetings to stir the pot, and I think that needs to stop as well. With that being said, I think some of the policies that are out there that have these types of limits are really, really constrictive. And I wouldn't suggest that we go that far. What I would suggest is we limit this to 5 different categories of individuals. One would be district residents. Number 2 would be a parent or guardian of a student in the district. This would allow those families who have split households, where one household does not necessarily live within the city limits, to be able to speak, since their student does attend our school district. Number 3 would be a business owner in the district, since they do pay taxes to our district. Number 4 would be an employee in the district. Again, we're lucky we have a lot of employees that do live here because they love Mentor so much. But we do have some that live outside the district as well. And then finally, number 5 is an elected official that represents our district. By including those people in our public participation, I think they have a vested interest in what's going on with our school district and within our city. This would eliminate the outside people from coming in to disrupt and would allow our board meetings to be much more productive. Talking through this process with Mr. Wade, we're probably a couple of months away from being able to pull all of this together. What I wanted to use this evening for was to share my thoughts on how we can get our arms wrapped around this so that we can be more productive and we can get some civility back to these meetings. Our next step, depending on what our discussion is here this evening around this topic, would be to write up what that policy might look like. We could bring that to the November meeting for a first reading. We could do the second reading at our December meeting and start these new procedures in January. This is a dream job for me. I've told all of you guys that when I first got hired. And you take away this one piece to the puzzle with the craziness that we have to work through in our board meetings and all of the follow-up work that goes into the fallout from our board meetings. And this still is a dream job for me. We have so many good things going on. And our teachers are incredible. Our administrative team is incredible. Our kids are amazing. I got the opportunity to welcome everybody to the kindness rally here at Mentor High School this morning. And what I told them was the best part of my day every day is going into a building, high-fiving kids, fist-bumping kids, and going into the elementary schools and having the little kids run up and grab a hold of my leg and looking down, hey, how's it going down there? Because they are so excited to be back in the buildings this year. And they're so excited to be learning. That's what we need to focus on. And we're here for the kids. And again, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you sit on. I've met with everybody. And that's the common thread all the way through, is that we're all here for what's in the best interest of the kids. And that's what I want to be able to work on. So I wanted to share those recommendations to this group here tonight, just to start that conversation around our board policies with regard to public participation. Again, you can see all of the other pieces to the policies that some of the other districts use. But I think these 3 would probably be the best bets to get us started. I don't want to go full bore into some things. If you ever get a chance, go ahead and read Dublin's public participation policy. You talking about locking things down, they've done it. We're not there. I think we can have some civil discourse here in Mentor. It's the whole reason I moved my family 3 hours away from anything they've ever known. It's to come here and be in this community. We moved into this community. And we live here, we love it here. But this stuff has got to stop.
Would you recommend keeping the 3-minute time limit?
Yeah, what I have done is I've pulled our current policy. I've crossed out a couple of things as far as paragraphs that we just simply aren't doing anyway. And And then I've included these 3 steps in a rewritten version of our policy. The only other thing that I would add is I know we've got a statement that's right at the beginning that addresses some of those things. But I think our policy currently says the presiding officer has the right and power to control the meeting and may take whatever actions are necessary to ensure an orderly meeting. If you take a look at the sample Neola policy that's listed in that document, it actually gets into exactly what those steps would be. And I would consider us taking a look at some of those things as well. And those things include, interrupting, warning, or terminating a participant's session if they make comments that are repetitive, obscene, and/or comments that constitute a true threat. Request an individual to stop speaking and/or leave the meeting when that person does not observe reasonable decorum or is disruptive to the conduct and/or orderly progress of the meeting.
So would that include, like labeling groups of people?
It could be defined that way. And again, this has got to be something that we as a board are going to be committed to. And here's the other part. We can't leave Mary Briner out to dry on this. And she's going to be the one that's going to have to enact all of this, but this has got to be a full board support on some of this stuff. The other things that can be done, request the assistance of law enforcement officers in the removal of a disorderly person when the person's conduct interferes with the conduct and orderly progress of the meeting. Call for a recess or an adjournment to another time when the lack of public decorum so interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting as to warrant such action. And then number 5, waive these rules with the approval of the board when necessary for the protection of privacy or the administration of the board's business. Those things we don't specifically say in our current policy. Might be another addition that we would consider as well. And that way, again, we talked about how unclear our policies can be sometimes. Simply stated, it may take whatever actions are necessary. Well, let's spell it out. What can we do?
I think that, I know Mary and Ginny and Tom, you guys have been on the board for a while. I've only been coming to board meetings for about 8 months before I decided to run. But it seems like the consistent thing that is the most inflammatory for people to get up and speak is when there are labels. And I'm not saying it's on one end, it's on both sides that it happens, that we've seen it, where somebody gets up to the microphone and they say, this group of people are this. This group of people who believe in this is that. And we assign a label to those people. And I want to see that ending across the board, because I think that just brings, takes it from a 2 to a 10 extremely quickly. And it also isn't a good representation, because then we're left there and we don't want people to assume that we agree with the speaker's statements because we're being silent. So how do we address that?
We agree to do that as a board and follow those protocols. And if we put those things in place, then we have the right to do exactly what our policy states then.
So it would be all of us who would recognize that somebody is labeling a group of people, and we would say, excuse me, Mr. whatever, Mrs. whatever.
And again, traditionally, that's going to go through the presiding officer of the board. So if there's something that's going on, Bill and I are not the board police. But if there's something that's going on, well,
Always wanted to be.
Bill does wear a badge every now and then, I don't know. But I think if we're seeing something that we feel is in violation, we can notify Mary, hey, might want to step in at this point in time. And, if that's the way we want to do it, we can do it that way. But again, we need the support of all 5 of you as we're doing these things.
It just needs to be consistent.
Absolutely.
So we can't, because then we're playing favorites and saying who we're going to defend and who we're not going to defend. I think if we apply it consistently, it would be appropriate. I think also, and I know, Mr. Tuttle, you can attest to this, when we went to the Willoughby East Lake Board to view their board, meeting, and I thought one thing that was interesting was that they took questions from the prior meeting, and in the very beginning of their meeting, they address and answer those questions. So I think there's a level of frustration as well when people get up to the mic and they explain, I mean, I've been there myself, where I explain, I have questions about X, Y, and Z, or concerns about this, that, and the other, and then you leave the meeting. Nothing happens. So then the next meeting, it takes you also from a 2 to a 5, because now you haven't gotten your answers and you feel like you haven't been heard. So what do you do when you feel like you haven't been heard? You're louder, right? So if we could also maybe implement something like that, I would be for the implementation of that.
Well, that did work well at the Willoughby East Lake meeting we went to.
And again, I think that's the other benefit of having this registration process now, too. And right now, we're getting people coming up to the microphones and, they'll say a name, and we're trying to get the name written down, and then they're going off. And I've got my notes from every board meeting we've had with all of the different things. But if we have a name, an address, an email, and then what their topic or what their question is, we've got that record. Now we can physically see that. Bill and I can start to divvy up, okay, who needs to answer this question? Is it me? Is it Bill? Is it, do I need to go to curriculum? Do I need to go to IT? Do I need to go to the bus garage? We can get those answers and get those responses, whether we do that, at the beginning of the next board meeting so that everybody's hearing that, or if it's directed, for one specific person.
That would be best done at the next meeting. That's the way they.
Yeah,
Just so
I
that
like
we can address it. We can certainly institute something like that.
And the
that would be
superintendent
helpful.
replied with the answers that opened the meeting, basically.
The board president, I thought.
Board
did.
president,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, the board
Yeah.
president, not the superintendent.
Well,
But
and again, we
the
could,
superintendent did speak
Yeah.
during the meeting that he gave an answer.
If he
And
knew the
again-
answer.
If he
yeah.
had the answer
If
at
there
that
was a
time,
question that
yes.
was asked during public participation and the superintendent could answer it, they would answer it there.
It would probably be good then to summarize at the end of a meeting, too. These are the questions that we've heard tonight, and this is what we'll get back to you on. The acknowledgement of people's questions is always well received as well.
Or even
Right.
get that acknowledgement right after the question, not after the, but
I think-
immediately after John Doe asks a question, say, we'll get that answer, could you tell me that again? Write that down. Don't come back at the end of the meeting, because then we're going to miss something.
I like having the opportunity to answer questions, because it does feel awkward when people ask. Sometimes questions are a bit rhetorical, and sometimes you can't ask them, you can't answer them right away without further information. So I don't want to seem disrespectful to someone's question that's more of a rhetorical question if we don't answer it either. So how would you deal with, I mean, a lot of times people email us and they ask us a question and we answer back in that way too. So I think that there's a few other ways to get questions answered, and it might be, if it's kind of a personal issue, something that they would want to talk to someone on one-on-one and have that email.
Well, the presiding officer should ask, could you repeat that question if it's not clear? Just like it happened Tuesday evening with the individual asked about the flag and the
oh,
Pledge of Allegiance.
by the way, I did check into all that, so we do have flags in every classroom. We do have everybody saying the pledge at the beginning of the day.
So that's a good answer for the next board meeting.
Thanks, Mike.
If we have everyone who'd like to speak at a given meeting register, let's say by noon of that day, so that it gives you some time, we could even take turns compiling that list or whatever. And in that request for that opportunity, I think it would make sense to identify which of these categories that you would be a part of. And if you have a problem that you'd like to call that to the board's attention, having also what you might consider a solution would be also good feedback. Because, we don't have to have a person speak at the meeting for us to receive and care about that information that they're bringing to our attention. More people send us emails throughout the month in between meetings than would be speakers at the meeting. So speaking publicly has a different feel to it, but it doesn't have necessarily a different outcome. You know, we care about what people are sharing their concerns, and if when we have those requests to speak publicly, if we can give that opportunity maybe to new speakers too, so that if somebody hasn't spoken at the previous meeting or the one before that, that individual would have a chance to share their views. Are you thinking, Craig, that we would have any kind of a total time frame?
Again, I don't know if that's where we're at yet. I think just by the registration piece, that will limit the overall number, because it's going to prevent the back and forth going on. Again, as we go through our process of the board policy manual overhaul, you know, if we start something small, just with those 3 pieces in January, by the time we get to March, April, May, we're going to know what's working, what's not working. If there's additional parameters that we want to put in based off of some of the other Neola policies and put time limits or whatever it is, then I think we can have that conversation there.
Can I ask a clarifying question, though, just for the minutes? I have registration,
Yep.
limiting who's allowed to speak to the 5 categories. What's the third one?
Being recognized to speak.
Okay. I
So,
didn't get the third.
sorry. Yeah, so being recognized to speak, basically, if we got that registration form, those are given to Bill. Bill just starts pulling those registration forms. That way, it's not in any semblance of order at that point. We call that individual to the mic. They have their 3 minutes. And then, again, to clarify, to make sure I'm understanding part of the conversation we just had, when the person finishes speaking, clarifying the question that they may have asked and indicating that we'll get an answer for them potentially by the next meeting, and then getting answers to those questions and making some statements at the beginning of the next meeting to say, okay, here are the answers from last month.
Would it make
Okay.
most sense for Craig and/or I to be the one who repeats the question, since it'll be Craig and/or I likely to be answering the
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. And you can, well,
And I gotta write it down
pulling the
anyway, so-
registrations
Right.
out of a barrel to see who speaks next? Or do you issue it based upon the people when they come in? If they come in 10 to 7, fill out the form?
I would think a random selection would be better somehow, to come up with a process that, devise a system that would be more randomized,
Okay.
so that we're not having the ping pong back and forth, and trying
Oh,
to
no,
be
no, no,
one
I'm not
mic.
suggesting ping pong. I'm
No,
just
no,
saying,
but just to kind of get away with the whole feel of that, right? So like,
if I'm first to sign up, I'm tag number 1.
correct.
Jenny be tag number 2. I'd speak first, boom, done.
I think it could be mixed, though.
But we
Yeah.
could devise a system that we get 15 people, and then I'll just randomize the order of the 15 people. And with one microphone now in the middle.
Yeah, we could go to 1 microphone, and we
And be here in
could go to
Paradigm.
just 1 hearing of the public.
And can we talk about possibly moving it back to Paradigm?
Yes, paradigm.
I think that just gives it
One
a
podium,
personal feel and.
No left and right and center.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
quite honestly, I've heard that from a lot of different people, that they liked it back here as well, with 1 microphone. So, again, that can be part of our conversations as we're going through.
Just to clarify, you said
Yep.
Mentor residents.
Yep.
We've had people come to our meeting and spout out an address,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't live there. So they claim to be a Mentor resident, and they're not.
So they
How do we
have to write
avoid
that
that?
address down. We can check those addresses between meetings. Obviously, it's not going to change them from speaking at that board meeting, but we can check those prior to the next meeting.
Okay, because, we've talked about this before. We've had
Yeah.
these issues for months, and we've talked about, maybe only having Mentor residents speak, so,
Yeah,
okay, so
there are-
that's how we're going to deal with that.
Yeah, that's how
In our current
other
policy-
districts have done it, too.
In our current policy, and you alluded to it, in the Neola policy would allow the board to make a decision as a collective group too. We talked about this at the work session, a couple work sessions ago. If there's a decision that's made by the president to enforce the rules and the board feels that that isn't what they want to do, there could be a motion and a second, and then we can vote. So if you had somebody come, let's say it was the governor, or the governor's not a good example, elected official who's not a representative of Mentor, because obviously the governor would be. But let's say it's another, say it's a Lorraine County elected official, and we want him or her to speak. By policy, you would not be allowed to speak. However, the board could deem that they want to hear what said person has to say. A motion could be made, a second could be made, and then a vote could be had to allow the person to speak.
Okay.
So there's, again, within policy, you can create exceptions if the board's in agreement as a total, as a group as a whole.
If
So
there's
why
a
not just
reason for
make
that
it
person to be there
An
as a
elected
guest.
official, state, county.
I just
city.
use that as an example. I mean, it could be anybody that you, it could be, you know, Ed wants to come and do a presentation, and we get into a situation, you know what I mean? Like,
There's
I'm just saying there's
reason.
always exceptions, but there's ways within policy, if it's written well, to allow the board to have flexibility if they agree as a collective group.
So would you put that in the policy that, for, if the board feels that this is important for their business that they're addressing at that time, that you could?
I think that's a decision,
override
that's a
that with
decision of the
one
board. I mean, I'm just saying that if there's concern amongst the members, that you could write in exceptions to address those concerns. Compromise. We've talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
Of making compromises. So I just share it as an option because
Yeah.
we have it kind of in our policy already, and Craig alluded to it as well. The one thing that I know has been discussed a couple times too is and it hasn't been addressed tonight, besides location, I would be remiss as a former educator not to at least bring this up to the board to consider, is when people bring specific students' names at public sessions,
Or staff.
And teachers.
or staff members.
And
We talked
that's
about-
in our policy already. We just need to make sure we follow it. And our policy states, the board will not hear complaints about school personnel nor against any person connected with the school system.
Another thing we could do too is if somebody.
At public, could we just
At
clarify?
public
I don't know.
participation.
At public participation.
The sec-
There's
here-
there's avenues.
Sorry.
There's avenues for people to bring concerns to the administration for that specific
The,
thing.
the next sentence says, "Other channels provide the board consideration and disposition of legitimate complaints involving individual employees of the
My comment was
district."
more for the public.
Yes, thank
Who's
you.
here tonight?
Even-
Thank you
even
for
still,
clarifying.
You're going to, person could come up to the podium and have the intention of saying Jane Doe, and we don't know who the person's going to talk about, right?
Correct.
Teacher Jane Doe.
But if they spell out what their topic is that they'd like to share,
Okay.
So,
But still,
and
would
if
they
they-
drop the name with us knowing it?
then we don't.
It would
That's
be
a
no
hard rule
different than
to
I think
enforce.
than when Ms. Payne brought up the fact that if someone says a
enforce it.
specific group, that it would be the job of the president or the board as a whole to say, Madam President or Mr. President, we don't address the names of students when we speak, correct? And then it would be the responsibility of the president, if he or she did not address that, to then say, yes, that's correct. We don't do that.
Again, we have to hold each other accountable to it.
And
So what's the penalty when someone goes up there and says something that they didn't tell us they were going to say a name of a teacher? So-and-so did this to my children. How do you,
I thought we were supposed to stop.
What's the penalty?
Because I talked about it, I asked Cheryl when she was here with OSBA, and I gave that specific scenario if somebody goes up and talks about a teacher. And I said, because I remember at the OSBA training, they kind of mentioned, like, that's the time to halt it and then request maybe that we all go into executive session with that person afterwards, or, other avenues.
Yeah.
if a person isn't going to respect the guidelines or diverts from what they said they were going to speak about, we can stop the timer and then not invite that person to speak again the next month.
Or you could just ask, I mean,
you just need to be prepared, Pat.
We
Correct.
could put that in board policy, that we reserve the right to not hear a speaker, I guess.
I would definitely want to run that by legal first, because I
Yeah.
think there are certainly some rights to our free speech that we retain, and I would never want to stomp on anybody's right.
Point.
And
Good point.
Well, what we have learned as well from legal, on top of that's a good point, is we have the ability to regulate the meetings per our policies. And if that's in the policy, you could, again, we have opportunities, right? We can do the same thing we talked about last time. We can ask nicely to remind somebody, give them a second chance. If they don't abide by that second chance, we can revoke their ability to continue to speak. If they refuse to stop speaking, we can tell them that to leave, and if they refuse to leave, we do have an officer on duty who's there who can escort said person out, or we can recess, or we can adjourn the meeting. So
And-
we have things in place already to address those.
And on that point, we have spoken multiple times about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable that people say during public participation. And something that somebody says might be offensive to one person might not be to another. So that's a fine line where we can stop people on what they can and can't say and where we have to stop them. So it's,
We've also had problems with people speaking who are not at the microphone.
exactly.
Making
We've had all kinds of
comments
things
or
that have been said in the
yelling out
last
or
18
whatever.
months.
And
Right.
that was particularly difficult at the Fine Arts Center because it's very hard. We've got strong light facing us so
Right.
that the audience is somewhat in shadow. And it's, and there's a lot of people present, so identifying who said what or when, and then
And
each
hearing.
side has expressed outrage that they were treated in a way that they felt was derogatory, and we hear that from both sides, and it's, I loved what you said, Craig, about returning civility, because in a group where there is respect and decorum, then you can discuss any kind of topic, but it's done in a respectful and thoughtful way, rather than in kind of an angry outburst that it reflects so poorly in our community, it breaks my heart.
But how do you stop that? But first off, let's revisit Tuesday, one of the last speakers. His speech was deemed by quite a few people very offensive, very offensive. How would you have stopped that? How in this will you prevent that? If he says, I want to talk about the math class or our math program, and he comes up and he turns it all into something else, he or she.
That's why you can interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's session when they make comments that are repetitive, obscene, and/or comments that constitute a true threat.
And who will
We stop them
enforce
from
that?
doing that. Well, it's Mary's job to enforce that, but it's our job to make sure we identify
We missed
that.
an opportunity
Well, and-
Tuesday to address that.
We did.
And it's
Right.
in our book.
Well, and
Which
the
is
thing
why we
by
have that.
having them register, if they say they're going to talk about one thing and they go up there and do another, that gives us the perfect opportunity. You're not talking about what you said you were going to talk about. What we're doing now gives them free rein to talk about whatever they want to talk
How do we handle
about.
it? How do we address it at that minute? Do we
Excuse
interrupt
me?
and
Mike
stop
and
them.
have the
Excuse me,
policeman
that, we
remove
say,
them?
excuse me, you're not following what you signed up to talk about.
And if you stop the mic, that also.
That's what we're going to start doing.
Because that's something that is not threatening or combative, it just, so if you are feeling, that this person is diverging from what's the topic, ask.
Well, I think we're all losing the focus of what a school board meeting is for. It's for conducting the school board's business.
That's right.
The whole community is looking at us like everything's out of control. It's not, but it appears that
has to
way.
be an open meeting
because of all this
by law.
chaos.
Has to be an open
I
meeting
understand
by
that,
law.
but we've got 2 hours of chaos, and we're losing the focus that this is a board meeting, the time for the board to conduct their business.
I understand.
I am more than happy to hear constructive questions and comments about educating our students.
We had
But
some of
that's
this
not what
already
we're
in
hearing.
place, and people still got out of control.
That's what we're trying
And
to
became
curb.
offensive.
That's what we're trying to curb.
Consistent enforcement.
So this is, it's all good procedural, but if we don't enforce them, we'll
Universally.
accomplish nothing.
Consistently.
We'll accomplish
Consistently,
nothing.
yeah, on all
Do we
ends.
have, I see a lot with like statements for people that are at the microphone, like how to gain access to the microphone and talk to the microphone. What about
the public comments when people are yelling out or arguing amongst groups. Is there any language that you've seen when you review things on how to handle that to keep us moving smoothly?
I think that goes back to the president regaining order and using the gavel to do such.
Don't you think,
Amen.
too, the fact that it's not at Paradigm, and people are, 20 yards away, they feel, I mean, I know,
Empowered?
or disconnected, because you
Yeah.
can't see faces.
Not empowered, they're
I mean, I
shaded.
can't tell you
They're-
how many times.
Well, they feel empowered
Invisible.
because they're so far away.
Yeah.
Right,
You
and
don't
so
see 'em.
we're losing that connectedness. And I think part of the solution could be to move back to Paradigm, because you are looking at people face to face, and you're making people sit by each other too, and it's just a different feel, and I think there's a lot more civility that'll come from that, not being 20 yards away, yelling at each other.
And they
I hope
walk
you're
up to the
right. I
podium
think it
one
will
at a
be easier
time
for
when they're
us at
called.
least to know what's going on, because there are many times that I'm told things and I didn't hear it, or I heard it once it really reached like a 10 and didn't know how it started.
Yep.
It's hard.
One of
It's
our
hard to know who's doing what and saying what.
most contentious meeting that we had was actually last August, and it was here at Paradigm. That was the reason we changed, because the people were very angry, and they were standing close to one another, and there was that confrontational feeling that it was escalating. And so spreading people out was one of the strategies we used to try to de-escalate that.
Craig, as we're talking about considering changing, would you talk to our police presence and see what their recommendation would be with that?
Well, that's another point,
Jack
because
spoke up.
I think if we can get our more civility back to our meeting, we can pay less money on our police presence.
Yeah, let's hope.
If we could have one police officer or none, how much money would we save there?
I
And it-
think if we go back, because I was here for that August meeting, and I know the reason why a lot of people came to that meeting was due to the Better Lessons slideshow, which had a, emphasis on many things that people disagreed with, which eventually one of those slideshows were removed. But what happened was there were people who did email in. There were people who spoke up before that meeting occurred, and they didn't receive answers. And they didn't receive a acknowledgement that, whoa, this may be concerning to some people, and we are going to examine it and look through it. So that, I think, is what led everybody to, the large crowd that came to that meeting, because they felt like they weren't being heard and they weren't getting answers. So that's the part of, sometimes I feel like we talk about public participation, and there are things certainly that we can do that we've mentioned tonight, but the consistent work that we need to do together and with, Craig and Bill to address some of these hot-button issues, so that we're coming up with compromises and things that aren't just one way, are going to help with public participation too.
Well, this is all new, 15 years, and 12 years, our board meetings were clean as a whistle, no problem, right, Mary? I mean, we didn't experience anything, but the issues came up, and that's what's exploded in the meetings. And we weren't prepared to be responsive. I have no idea when Willoughby started giving me answers in a methodical process. That was the first board meeting I went to there. I saw that and I observed that. And those are steps that will bring more good
Transparency.
conduct. Transparency will contribute to that. So people will get an answer to their questions. Whether or not we think they are as important as the speaker, it's not the highest level to some of us, but it's to them, it's very personable and just as important on the same level, but we think it's, I'm not saying we, but, sitting at the board, that's not the priority today, so we don't have an answer, we didn't respond. Now it's like boom, 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 we have to do it.
And
We have
kind
to
of the way that
respond.
was approached in other districts that I've been into, Tom, is, the superintendent would come back after a board meeting and just review what was discussed at that at that board meeting with the administrative team, and if there was a specific question that wasn't something, and again, like the flag thing, well, yeah, I've been in all the buildings, but I wasn't looking in each classroom to see if there was an American flag there. But came back, talked to all the principals, get the confirmations, and then I can answer that question. And we would individually respond to that particular community member in those districts where, okay, I had a question about secondary education when I was in Dublin. I would be able to give that response and just email that to that community member directly from my role as the director of secondary ed. I almost like this a little bit better because oftentimes, I think the flag question was a prime example. One person asked that, and then somebody else followed up with it, and Mike wanted that clarification. Yeah, we are going to get that answer for you. If we can do that in a public setting so that everybody that was there that heard that question heard the response then as well. I do like that process, along with the other things that I've suggested in regards
At the
to
board meeting, the best
getting them
answer,
down there.
because Mike
But
asked
let's
it
get
the
those
second time,
answers.
how many other adults in that room
Wanna
wanted
know.
to know that answer.
Right.
So the best is broadcast it at the next meeting.
So I like this procedure actually better than what we did when I was in Dublin, quite honest.
I think too, the registration process, I have mixed feelings about it. One, I like it for the reasons that you guys had mentioned, for having a document that you can refer to, and especially if there are questions, we know who asked it and possibly what the topic was. But I think sometimes, like even on Tuesday, the person who spoke that Tom was referencing could have had DEI written on there, and that could have fallen under the DEI umbrella. So one of the conversations that I really am hoping that we eventually get to, and I know it's on our agenda today as well, is the whole conversation around DEI, because there are pieces of it that some of our community is not going to support. For instance, if we talk about white privilege, and that's not a universally accepted concept. So if we are going to implement training, whether it's for teachers, the all staff or students, we need to be transparent and let people know that's what we're, the direction that we're heading in.
And again, if somebody puts DEI down as the topic that they want to talk about, and it gets to a point where we're falling into one of these categories then where, okay, that's not officially what you were talking about, or it becomes repetitive or discriminatory or constitutes a threat of some sort, that's when we notify Mary, hey, that's not exactly what we're talking about here, and we need to terminate that participant session.
And we're still, registration-wise, are we cutting it off at 7, or if somebody comes in at 7:30 because they're late and they want to register, they can fill something out and hand it?
Yeah,
How's that going to
the majority of policies out there just say by the beginning of that meeting. There are a handful, Jenny, made a reference, can we get that like 12 hours ahead of time? There's one district that does 12 hours in advance. There's another one that does like 5 days in advance. If you want to participate at the public portion of that meeting, we need that before the meeting starts, and that's pretty standard.
I think so long as it's reasonable enough that it's doable. Like if somebody shows up at 7:30 and insists that they have an opportunity to speak, well, that's really unfair to, whomever is responsible for putting that group together. So I think it's a email process where you could register, so you can do that from anywhere. Most people have access to email.
And you'd also have a table with forms that.
Right, for both.
Right there
Correct.
as they came in, so.
That would be better.
Wouldn't be a burden of.
Yeah, so
Well,
if somebody knew they were going to be late and wanted to register ahead of time, if we've got that process in place, yeah,
I
absolutely.
like the both idea with signing in physically there if you want to, or emailing ahead of time.
It'd be a pretty easy thing for us to put a Google form together that they could fill out online.
Selfishly, as the secretary of the board, this is going to be just huge, because half the time I can't hear people's names.
Yeah.
The other half of the time, if I apologize if any of you spoke, Mike, yours is easy, so I've never misspelled your name, but I've misspelled a lot of other names. But it will make that piece easier too. It'll make the minutes more accurate because of it.
Yes.
And follow-up, if we have a topic we need to follow up on, absolutely.
Right. the
I think this
person
is a good start,
Can get,
definitely.
that's where I think if it's not a handwritten thing, it's easier for that follow-up piece. Because then, there's not transcription issues with whatever's been written down, where, that would just be helpful, I think, to have something where you can point and click. I'm very sensitive to the amount of time that is needed for our administrators, our CFO and CEO, to answer whatever it might be. So having to transcribe it, I think, is less efficient. Not that we couldn't do that, but it's just unusual, I think, for most folks to not have email or a smartphone or some access point where they could enter that information.
We could even have the form electronically here.
Yeah,
It could be an electronic form. I could come in, Bill Wade, da-da-da-da-da, and hit send, through Kristen. Kristen will probably man that as the community relations
Yeah,
director.
with a laptop.
It doesn't have to be hand, it could be up through 7 o'clock when gavel hits, they do it that way.
So then how do you select them randomly if they're electronic submissions? And some fill out paper? How do
You
you,
could shuffle them, actually. That would be very doable.
print somebody who registered it online?
Well, if it's all in a form electronically, I could have my computer up with a sheet that just has them. and
So
I
they
can-
can come in, they wait in line to put it in?
We
Yeah.
could do it, if we have it
yeah,
a link to
we-
our website.
See, Willoughby's like, they took their piece of paper, they went back and sat down, wrote on it.
We could do it that way, too.
And turned it back in, rather than make people stand in line to fill out a,
Well, you would hope most people would do
Entry.
it ahead of time. That's what I mean, if it's something that's right on our
Paper, just
website.
paper.
Well, I
You want them
think,
here for the meeting, you
Tom,
don't.
there's cost to paper.
A slip.
really?
Bring your own paper.
They cut it into 5 pieces. It's
All
like
right,
5
front and back, I got
plans
you.
of,
Hold on, we just got free paper from Neola.
There you go.
Just fill
It
this
doesn't,
out.
it doesn't matter. Yeah, it
5
just,
by 7.
I was
Get a
just,
piece of paper and you got it in a box, you pull one out and
perfect.
you call the next name, John, you're in the queue. Jane, you're done. John's up.
That would just prevent somebody trying to sign up that might know they're going to be late that meeting. That's the only drawback to the
You can
paper
still
piece to the
accommodate, they
puzzle.
come
We do
walking in,
both,
but
right? Can we?
they know the rule. They can sign up late.
Well, I think we'll have to have some grace, too, for the,
Sure.
because we're talking, I know when we're thinking, we're probably all talking about the people who continuously show up, at the board meetings. But if we have somebody, let's say, who never came before, and they walk in, they might not know the process. So is there something that we can do to make people aware, at the beginning?
Well, we would have 2 months, right? We would have November for the
The first
first reading.
reading.
You'd have December, the second reading. And it wouldn't come into play until January. So I think 3 months of board meetings.
Maybe we
And we
could
could
put it
put-
on our agenda or.
Or on the
board
big screen behind us.
You know what I mean, like,
Like to
as
speak.
people, if they look at the agenda.
Oh, that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
on
In the
website or
beginning.
something.
Please
You
fill
can put it,
out
you
the
can put,
form.
we could have it, Kristen could add it to the website under the board.
Jenny had a really good idea just
Yeah.
now, that she said maybe like on the board behind when people
Next
are
to the
walking
big
in, have
cardinal.
it, these are our
The next speaker.
public participation.
Well, at the beginning of the meeting, before things start, we have that, just a comment out there.
If you'd like to speak.
If you'd like to speak, make sure you fill out the form,
Good.
just so that we get adjusted to how this is going to work
If we would be at Paradigm, it could be on the
on
screens.
all the screens.
So that would be,
I've got
I
that
like
in the
that
notes
idea.
So
too.
ideally by January, we would be back here as well as what I'm hearing, correct?
yeah, I would like that. I would like that a lot.
I mean, as long
I've
as our.
wanted this changed
safety
back a long
forces
time
feel
ago.
it's okay.
And that would be with just one microphone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that.
One mic, and they get up after the preceding speaker's done, then they get up. come
Are
up.
we still thinking of
Nobody
having
in line.
2 hearings of the public?
Again, this is the only district that I've been in that's had 2. Normally, it's 1 right at the beginning, that are on topics both on and off the agenda.
You know what? I just thought of something, though. And I didn't, until you said this, I didn't think of this. If they have to register beforehand, but they hear something that we say or something, you know, and they want to speak to how we voted or something that we said during the meeting, then they would have to wait until the following meeting?
Certainly, any person can email on any topic, so it's not as though there isn't opportunity to express your concern, your frustration, your question about something they heard or something they thought of subsequently, that, I mean, I'm pretty certain all of us read our email. You know, we get a variety of points of view. I looked over what things we had received from the last 9 months, 10 months. And as I was going through all the email, we had about 55 people contacting us. Some were names that I was familiar with because they've spoken at meetings. Other people, you know, was a specific idea, suggestion, or concern. So it was interesting, and I would characterize it as a pretty even split. It was 29-25. Split on issues that might have been kind of in the more conservative category, if you want to call it, or issues that were in the more liberal category. It was an interesting breakdown.
That's
This
very
is
good.
individual speakers, not the volume of emails.
So if someone comes up to the mic and they've already said, I want to speak about DEI, and they come up and say, I want to speak to that, what the vote went, are we going to stop him or her that says he's not speaking on DEI, but talking about a vote they didn't approve of? We going to stop him?
If we want to stop that back and forth,
No, really?
I mean, to me, if everybody
Okay.
has access to the agenda, people are going to be speaking to us before we're going to be voting on anything.
So that'll be up to Mr. Wade to see that this individual was going to speak about DEI, and then it turns into,
They won't have any other board business that will have carried forward until after the speaking portion of the meeting has
once they get up
ended.
at the mic, they can say what they like.
But that's what we were saying, is if the person says they're coming to talk about
So Mary would have
transportation,
to gavel them,
She
Ginny.
can gavel them, she can
You
ask
ready to
Paul
gavel
to
'em?
cut the microphone. I mean, cutting off the microphone might be the easiest and most effective way
Okay.
to interrupt if somebody doesn't follow through on what they said they want to
Someone will have to
speak
tell
about.
Paul to do that. They'd
Right.
have to come through Mary to do that. 'Cause
Right.
we don't want that
Yeah.
falling on
Decision
as
to
an
be made by
administrative
him.
task outside
Yeah.
of the
Well,
board.
no, you don't want Mike to do that,
No,
but,
um,
yeah. The
I think what
simple,
we're trying to do is have people be proactive, not reactive. Oh, I don't like what this person said, so I've got something to say about that. Or I don't like what Maggie said about this, so I'm going to call her out on it. So you come to the meeting, you've got a question or a concern, you sign up, I've got a question about the math curriculum. You go to the podium when it's your turn and you talk about it, period, you're done.
and it doesn't even have to.
That's what public
it's
participation is about.
Open topic, right?
All topics.
Any
anything,
topic, any topic they want to talk about.
Agenda or not.
Even if they want to get up there and talk about their small business that they're promoting. Because over the years,
Well,
we've
if they're
had
a
that.
business owner,
We've had
Well,
that.
We've had all kinds of
I mean,
interest
the
groups.
Yes.
purpose is to inform the board, though, and I don't know if we should allow a promotion, you know, we're having a sale at Kohl's. You know, this is,
I have a house for sale.
I have a house for sale, right.
Maybe
This
your
is-
CTE wants to buy it.
This is to inform board business, so,
Could
I
be
mean,
good.
Done.
it could be broad. I'm not saying, I don't want to, you know, limit things that would be
Right.
relevant to the board, but I mean, that would.
but they could.
I guess they could. There is not current proposed policy against it, so.
I don't
Well,
think
the
that's,
3 steps are going to take tweaking. Because if there are 3 short steps,
Yeah.
very few words. It's going to have to get expanded and improve it, tweak it.
So when someone signs, I need for the minutes, I mean, where are we landing with regards to name, address?
And
Do they
which
have to have
category
it?
they
Do they
fit
have a
into.
topic?
Yeah.
There's a topic?
Yeah,
required?
topic is
Absolutely.
typically included in there.
Okay.
And we can put maybe a sample policy together, because obviously we're getting up against our time here today. And I knew our agenda items, we won't get to everything again. But I know we've got another, we want to set aside the October 27th session for the financial conversations. I know we're meeting again on November 1st for the OSBA conversation.
Could we,
Go
we
ahead.
had talked about this, I would be happy to buy myself some more time for November 1st to have the financial discussion.
So do you want to flip those and do the financial discussion on November 1st and
And then
do
do
the
OSBA?
OSBA and the additional pieces
OSBA when? What date?
on
The
October
20
27th, which we've already got
Yeah,
scheduled?
we already have both scheduled.
Yeah,
We just haven't sent out the notices yet.
and we
because
could
of-
just flip-flop the agendas?
Yeah, if that would be okay with the board, because that program that I got accepted into is actually the 25th and 26th, so I'll be out both days for that Georgetown training.
Okay, good.
So you'll do your
That makes-
financial on the 1st,
On November 1st?
and then we'll do our board stuff on the 27th.
Yeah, so we can talk the OSBA agenda, and then we can, what I could probably do at that point is maybe bring some sample language, based off of what we currently have in board policy, with a couple of the things that we've talked about here today, and then bring us like a sample form that we would have filled out, just to make sure that we're all comfortable with that, so that when we get to that November meeting, we can have a good first reading of that policy and have that ready to roll.
Can we address too, so it's going to take 2 meetings, obviously, to, implement some of this stuff. I think a lot of this back and forth could be ceased at the next meeting even, as long as we make it known that we are not going to tolerate certain types of speech, as in discriminatory, race, religion, sexuality, things like that.
Name calling, are we going to add name calling to that list?
Name-calling.
Because we've had 18 months of that.
Yeah, I think, we've all experienced
Yeah.
it, so.
Call me Tom,
Absolutely.
but
I
not late for
agree.
dinner.
So, well, I think
Late for
that's
dinner.
a discussion that we should have too, because in our minds, maybe people have different ideas of what is tolerable and what isn't, so.
That's
I
right.
think we do have different ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
if-
so
And
I
that's a
think-
problem.
Yeah, and
So we
we
have
need
to
some
work-
consensus
Agree.
about that in
Yeah.
order to pull this
What-
together.
Yes.
What one person might gavel on,
Right.
the other
Yeah.
person wouldn't, and we can't fight at the table.
I agree,
About-
right,
yeah,
I agree.
agree.
So if we can
100%.
get, it doesn't have to be tonight, but I would like to have some kind of, maybe conversation around that, just so we have, when you
Yeah.
talk about goal setting, right? You have to
Right.
have SMART goals, they have to be specific, measurable, attainable. So I think that having that conversation where we can have consensus on what is allowable and what isn't. That way
Absolutely.
then we know what we're
I
holding
think-
everybody to.
I think that's a very good point.
And again, that way we've got the consensus around the table before we go into the next meeting. We can discuss what that process is
Right.
going to be, hey, Madam President, this is unacceptable,
And then-
based off of what we discussed at our last work
I think the
session.
community would appreciate that and not feel like it's only this side or that
Right.
side that's being enforced.
Right.
An
And I hate to call
open
sides,
conversation
but
at a board
it's
meeting.
what it is.
Right.
Here's the size of the form I would suggest.
I will fit it in this form for you.
You'll get
Tom.
5 out of a sheet of paper like that.
I can take my very nice handwriting and do it really small.
They can
Oh,
fold
we
it in
got a lot
half
of
and put it in the
information to put on
box.
there.
No, it shouldn't be a lot. Name, address, a couple lines.
Should be good.
Brief description, 3 lines.
And check which category you fit into.
In the essence of time, I think number 2 and number 3 on our agenda are quick things, just, I want to get a quick answer. With student handbooks, I know dress code was one of the pieces. Have you heard anything additional, Annie, that needs to be addressed? Or were those guidelines that the secondary principals have acceptable at this point? Are we still good there?
Yeah, it looks like, so, and correct me if I'm wrong, even though our policy says, has limited verbiage in it.
Right.
There is specific dress code policy for each building, and
That's the administrative guideline piece that we hope to have.
but we do have it. I mean, it's in the
Yeah,
student handbook,
yeah.
so that parents are aware of what's acceptable and
Yeah.
what's not acceptable.
Okay. Any other student handbook issues? Okay, so we can take that off the list. And then the only thing from the school safety perspective that I wanted to be able to share, since it's somewhat timely, is, again, Bill Porter, as our school safety liaison person here this year, has submitted the school safety grant to the State Department at this point. That allows us to have, hang on, let me look at my notes.
100,000.
Up to 100,000 per building. That is including our preschool and cares in the mix, so we have that in our grant. The grant was submitted on September 30th, and a lot of what went into that grant was based off of the school safety audit that was done by a member of the Ohio School Council. And he went around to each building in our district, gave us several recommendations, some things that we could actually fund through this grant, some other things that we're going to need to consider as we move forward. Our grant is really going to be focusing on upgrading our communication devices. So the walkie-talkie piece to the puzzle, oftentimes as we hear the results of a school crisis around the nation, one of the biggest issues that they've run into are phone lines that are jammed, cell reception that is jammed, and by utilizing basically the walkie-talkie system that we currently have, it's okay, but needs some serious upgrades. So we're looking at doing that consistent across all of those buildings. So that's one area that we're looking to utilize these grant funds for. And then the other one is just upgrades with our security cameras. They've gone through and looked at each security camera, kind of the range that camera is able to identify in those buildings. There are needs for additional cameras. There are needs for some different types of cameras that have a little bit more breadth to what they can see. So we're looking at those two pieces predominantly out of the grant. A couple of other things that came out of that audit that we will continue to address that won't necessarily be part of the grant. And I mentioned this the other evening in my goal setting, was looking at a full-scale drill in June. And then also additional training from the school safety perspective, especially for some of our new staff that has not been part of the ALICE training that we've done with several of our staff members already. Some other ongoing improvements that were mentioned in that report, again, looking closely at exterior doors and window improvements. Those are things that we'll continue to cover currently. Another thing that again, we might look at down the road a little bit more is fencing around some of the elementary playgrounds. Especially, I know Ridge is one of the concerns since it was middle school now and elementary, and making sure that we've got that area secured. And then the other piece is, and this would be some future capital improvement considerations, security vestibules in each of our buildings. Because currently, we've got the buzzer system to allow somebody in, but as soon as they walk in, they have immediate access to the building, as opposed to coming into a security area, whether it's the main office, and then we allow them into the building, or we escort them to the location that they're interested in visiting. So that's another consideration that came out of that safety audit. Again, a little bit costly as far as the design and the construction of those, but it's one of those considerations that we're going to continue to look at from the school safety perspective. So I wanted to be able to share that with the group here
Craig,
tonight too.
Say, we had that parent who had that recommendation about bus tracking. So I just thought that was such a fresh idea. I hadn't heard
Like
that
that idea.
mentioned.
Yep.
And I would think it's fairly inexpensive as improvements go, so that you know when your child's bus is coming, so you're not leaving, especially as, it gets darker, or we have
Yes.
the delays that are because of the bus
Yeah.
driver issues.
Yeah,
And I just wanted
absolutely.
to see if you could touch base on the retired police
Yes.
officers for possibly implementing something like that. I know the cost, I think, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was somewhere between like 350,000 to 400, depending on, I'm going to make you do the math real quick again, no?
Yeah, I think it was closer to 500,000, but I think one of the police officers, when I gave the number, corrected me that I was about $10 off on the per hour rate. I got one out,
No.
so I was off by at least a fraction.
So can you let us know, where are we at with that? Is it something we can consider, seriously consider? I know
Yeah.
Beechwood is, I think, what I had said.
Yeah.
Has this system in place, and I believe Bill Porter did contact them.
Yeah, so we've had conversations twice already with our city council as well. I know our city council and city government are very interested in this possibility of getting SROs in each of our buildings. So we had one conversation, Maggie, that was, I think, August 3rd, and then we had another
That
follow-up.
wasn't on retired officers.
No, that was just on expanding it.
Regular resource officer.
And Bill shared some of the information that he uncovered from Beechwood, so we're continuing to look at that possibility too. Again, one of the things that we talked to in our follow-up conversation with City Council, our Chief of Police, at our safety meeting with Bill and Kristen Estes was part of that as well, was that there's still concerns, okay, who's going to want to do this? And that'll be our next phase of this, but we're going to continue those conversations to try and get something pulled together. We actually also had some conversation in our team meeting here yesterday about that topic as well, and really talked about, from a financial oh, no, that was this morning, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It just seems like
It's
it.
been a long week. We had a conversation here earlier this morning and into the afternoon about just our financial picture as a whole and what sort of levy-type thing might allow us to pay for that as well, because there are different types of levies that we'll be discussing, and there are safety levies that potentially could do that. But again, Bill's amazing with the money and the numbers and the way he can find things through grants and through cost-saving measures that might be able to kind of uncap some other dollars that we might be able to devote to this too. So we're trying to approach it from several different avenues, again, with the ultimate goal of getting an officer in every building.
And then, I know we haven't gotten to the DEI piece yet, and we're going to probably do that at a later meeting.
Yeah,
But what
hopefully
about-
on the 27th, we can talk about that a little bit more.
And then what about the pronoun policy that we were supposed to talk about?
Yep.
I don't want to drag it into a whole nother month.
No,
So is that something we could all discuss in October?
Yeah, so my thinking then for the 27th, we'll do the OSBA agenda.
Okay.
How big is that voting agenda, Tom?
Do we
Do you
know?
know yet?
It's fairly large,
it is.
but there's
I don't
really,
know.
I know you asked
I'll
Tom,
call
let Tom
Tom
answer.
Hack, because
you
he's
looked
done
at
this
it?
before. It's lengthy.
I've done it before. I've done it for the last 14 years.
How long is it?
Well, I got to look at the,
Yeah, it's-
what's on the, have you looked at the agenda?
I have not.
Okay.
I've gone down the the proposals, the resolutions,
Yeah.
but it's long.
Have you looked
Okay.
at it,
Several
Edie?
hours.
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
How many things are proposed?
I don't know the exact number, but I don't think there was like a giant amount, maybe. I mean, there's one topic that I know is going to be the lengthy
right.
topic
A
for
little
everybody.
bit controversial.
It's
Yeah.
the parents' rights
A lot of
topic,
times
so.
there's just like-
The rest of it is like fluff, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
a lot of times
I
it's
looked at
just
it as well.
corrections and verbiage.
Could
Yeah.
you guys do a little bit of homework?
Sure.
And then come with your ones that you think might
Yeah,
be the
that's it.
ones.
Yeah.
Might be,
Contentious?
like, these are the ones that we really want to
Limit that
discuss as a
discussion.
group.
Yeah,
just to
because there's
those.
really only like one that I saw on there
Okay.
that's what I would assume is where we need our
We
bulk
can
of our
probably go
conversation.
through and vote on them in chunks, you know.
Okay.
Can you send us the link?
Yes, authored
Of
by,
what you're using, so.
Right
we're
up here
on
in
the-
Northern
using the
Ohio.
same.
You have a copy of it?
yes,
Can you send it to everybody?
sure.
Okay, so we'll start with that then. Then we'll jump into the board policy conversation, public participation, form, and then pronoun survey, and then finish off with DEI. All right? So that'll be our agenda for the 27th.
Sounds good.
All right. Any other items?
Times for those meetings.
The 27th, was that
We
a
were planning on the 27th at 5:30.
5:30 to 8?
Right, so are we flipping them and flipping the times as well?
Do we want to go 6 to 8 on the 27th and 5:30 to 8 on November 1st then?
Yeah, I'm
Your
good.
financial update, 5:30?
I won't need 2.5 hours. I
Are you
just don't
sure?
like starting at 6. I like starting at 5:30.
So do we want to say 5:30 to
on
7:30? Do we want to say, well, again,
No,
that-
I can.
You need an
you
hour?
still good there?
7:30.
5:30 to
I'll probably-
7:30 for both?
We'll probably need 2 hours for mine.
So 5:30 to 7:30.
5:30
for
to
both.
7:30
For
for
both.
both? That work? How's that work for everybody out there? Okay.
That was a test. You're not allowed to communicate. Shh.
Nice.
Just nod.
So we
All
do
right.
5:30.
So 5:30 to 7:30 on the 27th,
And
5:30 to
first.
7:30 on the 1st.
Yep.
So we
Oh,
will do
okay.
both of them just in 2 hours.
Okay.
So, yeah, my goal is for the first to have, the forecast is pretty much done, but then presenting scenario, we have to have discussion about the renewal of the emergency levy, and when we would put that renewal up, which would be a no tax increase, no new taxes. And then what we're going to do with regards to funding the permanent improvements that we do through the district, which could lead into a discussion of how to fund extra school resource officers.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
So, and again, remember, permanent improvement levies only are for useful life of 5 years.
Go ahead.
Books, balls, bricks, buses, so on and so forth. It's not for salaries and badges, and not for salaries and benefits.
So if we're doing that on the 1st, then the 3rd is our Citizens Financial Advisory.
Correct. Which
pretty
then we can
impressive with
discuss
the
with
timing.
them, not only the 5-year forecast, but the discussion is they've been pressing us to come up with a way to better fund our capital improvements.
That's right.
Because that's where that all stemmed from, remember? That, I mean, this discussion for the community and for the board as a whole.
Correct,
The
in the
permanent.
presentation, putting the money where it really belongs.
Yes, it was stemmed from our Citizens Financial Advisory, which is made up of business professionals that live in the district, stating that their preference is that we're using permanent improvement monies to fund our capital improvements and PI-type purchases rather than the general fund.
So it's clearly defined.
Correct. Which then would reduce our expenses, which would then allow us to lower future millage and hold off the need for future millage as well with regards to general operating dollars.
Makes sense.
So can we change this to 5:30 to 7 since you just did part of it?
Well, you know I like to hear myself talking. You didn't let me.
I
talk
know.
tonight, so I
We'll celebrate if we leave at 7.
I didn't see your name on the agenda.
Might not have Mary Galvin.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Who motioned, sorry?
That's me.
And then Ms. Payne was second, right?
Yes.
Ms. Jessling?
Yes.
Ms. Payne?
Yes.
Ms. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Ms. Briner?
Yes.
Meeting adjourns at 8:13 PM.
Thank you, everyone.